Asim Zia, Professor, Environmental Policy, University of Vermont. I just want to draw back to the Paris Agreement question that at that point of time there was a discussion in environmental policy theory. It's very well recognized that a carbon income tax, carbon trade tax internationally would be way more efficient and with safeguards embedded into them, like fair trade mechanisms that would be actually have less transaction cost, but also be more respectful and more efficient. So I'm wondering, why don't we just abandon this market mechanisms, because carbon market Article 6, because I think I don't see that any lesson has been learned from the CDM or RED Plus in terms of the additionality, leakage, social safeguards. And on top of that, what we are hearing about these human rights violations, that's really disgusting. So I'm just wondering that, in terms of, is there any discussion even about the floor for the market, like minimum floor price? Because when you set up the tax mechanisms, for example, you can embed those differentials in the sense of say, okay, you need to pay for, internalize the cost of human rights violations, internalize the social cost of carbon into your price mechanism. And I just want to make one more comment that I think when we sell cheap carbon market credits to the developed country industrialized firms, we're basically abetting the carbon criminals in terms of making them do more of what is needed not to happen more. So I'm just wondering I'm really kind of interested to hear about your perspective on some of these questions that I raised here. Thank you very much.
You want to start over here this time? Or?
About the Paris Agreement, maybe you can answer.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I will say, maybe I'll start for a second and then, so just that, because we ask that question too. Why are we still here talking about carbon markets again? And I do think that one of the reasons, and Erica touched on this a little bit, is because of the lack of public climate finance. And so, for a long time, we've been seeing a push from people who are looking to buy offsets because they don't want to do their mitigation internally, whether it's a country or a company. But I think we're also seeing now is that the sort of failure of public climate finance thus far has meant that there are plenty of developing countries who are really looking for support wherever they can find it, and right now the only ones knocking are carbon credit markets. But as Erica pointed out, this is not, carbon markets aren't climate finance. Not only are they then selling a sort of right to pollute, they're also generally not getting the benefits that they actually need to do the types of transitions that we need. But I do think it's going to be really hard to get in front of that without providing actual climate finance from the Green Climate Fund, from the New Loss and Damage Fund, from the Adaptation Fund. And so I think that we're really going to have to wrestle with that, both as civil society and as governments. And maybe I'll leave it there and see if either of you have something to add.
Yeah, I think there are often discussions around the social cost of carbon, and obviously, if you're thinking about the cost of carbon, whether it's a credit or anything, it naturally should take into account the broader social cost. I don't know that that's discussed as much here, at least not to my knowledge, and I think that's on the question of what should we tell companies and companies that rely on carbon credits, and should we just abandon them? I think my answer is yes, we should, because not only no matter how many different standards that have been developed thus far, no matter how many efforts there have been to create more integrity in the carbon market, or make carbon credits excellent, it hasn't worked. And it's not new. These aren't as you mentioned, we haven't learned the lessons from the CDM. we sort of think we have, and instead of calling it the clean development mechanism, we put in things around sustainable development. But there's no evidence so far that we're not just repeating those same mistakes. And so I think that I do think that, there are over and over and over again attempts to sort of make better carbon credits and to see like, oh, well, if we just put in these standards, they'll have more integrity, whether that's from an additionality standpoint or an emissions reduction standpoint or a human rights and social standpoint. And it largely hasn't worked. And so what really needs to happen is that companies need to reduce their emissions. That's what we need to do. And we know that. And I think that the other thing, and I think Eve, you touched on this in sort of thinking about it, is that in addition to sort of the human rights problems or the fraud problems of the credits themselves, we know that if we're not reducing emissions, if we're not reducing greenhouse gases, if we are not having as I think everyone here has heard, a full, fast, fair, funded phase out of all fossil fuels, full stop, no words around unabated, no words about anything. If we don't have that now, we're not going to deal with the climate crisis. And that's what we need. And so perpetuating a system that allows for ongoing, production and use of fossil fuels, most often in the global north, who is most responsible for this crisis, by sort of buying offsets elsewhere, it's just not going to work. We're not going to get there. And so what we really need is that public climate finance. We really need actual finance, and not finance that is allowing for pollution in the north with action in the south, but finance that is promoting action in the south, that's promoting, good action, rights-based action, locally led climate action. So I think if we're looking for good examples, that's what we should be looking for. Solutions that, women on the ground have, solutions that indigenous peoples have, and not looking for ways to sort of buy our way out of doing what we need to do.
Maybe not to speak to this, but to link it all also back to the negotiations, as was also the question before. If any of you are also very concerned about this, and I get the feeling that people are. So right now, the 6.4 text does not contain a requirement for these elements, these safeguards and this grievance mechanism to actually be finished, to be adopted before any activity takes place under 6.4. So please, if you have any chance of any links to do advocacy work, please use that. Also, if you have input, if you know stuff about human rights, if you know stuff about law, or if you don't, if you just have experience, please make inputs to the supervisory body. They do read everything, they always tell me, on the SD tool and on the grievance mechanism that they're developing now.